If you're compositing visual effects onto footage shot in log, you might have run into a workflow problem. If you color grade your footage first, you're locked into the look of the shot before the visual effects are finished, and color grading is usually the very last step of the process. But if you leave your footage in log, the image is extremely flat, which makes it almost impossible to judge contrast and color while you're compositing. So how do you composite visual effects onto log footage before the final color grade? Well, I'm going to show you how to do this, and I'm going to show you how to do it in After Effects. The way that this is normally done in a professional pipeline is that the footage is shot in a log color space, and those shots are passed off to the visual effects companies or the artist that's going to be compositing the shots. You'll know what camera it was shot on, so you can convert it into that color space, and sometimes they'll give you a LUT for what they were using on set when they shot. But in order to match the finished visual effects shots to the other shots that were shot raw out of camera, you have to maintain that log color space all the way through the pipeline. So the footage is shot in log, composited visual effects, exported in log, and then everything color graded all together the same at the end. And this is how most professional pipelines work, because it keeps the maximum dynamic range for the final color grade. I'm going to use this shot that I've already composited the visual effects so that we can focus specifically on color workflow. Now, the tricky thing in After Effects, which is why a lot of people don't composite 32-bit linear things inside of After Effects, is they haven't cracked the pipeline, and this actually took me a long time to figure out how to do this properly, and now I'm going to show you how you can do it inside of After Effects if that's your preferred tool of compositing. So if you look at this shot on its own, this is what the plate looks like for the shot. As you can tell, this is the log color space. It's totally washed out. And if I were to go in and start adding 3D renders on top of it, you could see that my color space is going to be very difficult to work in because the renders have true blacks, the plate doesn't have true blacks, and there's a lot of things that are mismatched that are going on here, so we need to sort that out first. Inside this comp, I have a reference of what the footage looked like straight out of camera. So here is a reference that you can see what the footage actually looked like out of camera. It's just slightly more contrasted. There's a little bit more saturation, but there's not too much different that's going on. And as you can see right here, here's the composited version that I did inside of After Effects, where the 3D renders match the plate. And if you wanted to get like a basic look, you could add something at the top of it where you're just adding a little bit of levels and saturation to match what was coming out of the plate. So you could see this is the reference plate from what was coming out of the camera, and this is our comp here. So the difference between the two is pretty close, but in the end, you're going to end up turning off the look, and this is what you're going to deliver that will go to the color grade, so it will match the rest of the footage exactly the way it's supposed to be. And as you can see in DaVinci, this is the raw footage coming out of the camera that has a color grade applied to it. And now if we were going to take this same exact grade and apply it to the visual effects shot, it will match exactly the same as the rest of the footage. As you can see, this is the footage here. This is the visual effects plate. Matches exactly the same. Okay, so jumping back inside of After Effects, the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your project is set up with the correct color settings. So go into your project settings. You're going to want to make sure that your bit depth is set to 32 bits. You're going to want to make sure that your working color space is sRGB, which is at the top here. That matches most monitors, so that way you can see screen accurate what your composition looks like. And then you're going to want to make sure that linearized working color space is turned on, and hit OK. And working at 32-bit linear color space just gives you the maximum dynamic range for high quality compositing. You'll notice this specifically with things that deal with lights or depth of field or bokeh, things like that. So then you're going to want to import your footage. I have it already set up as a DPX sequence, so if I were to go put this into a new composition, you can see the footage looks super washed out. Well, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your footage is interpreted correctly. So go into the interpret footage settings, go into the color, and make sure that this is turned from working color space to sRGB. So this keeps everything consistent. Your color space is set to this, your footage is interpreted the same, and everything should look the same across the board. Okay, but let's say that you needed to comp in some visual effects elements that are already shot, like some assets. We can go here to the Storyblocks library and look for something like smoke, and you're going to find all kinds of cool things. Let's see if we went to this as like a steam fog clip here. Okay, and let's say we download this asset, and then we bring that shot into After Effects. Well, you're going to go into Interpret Footage Main, and just make sure that your color space is also set to sRGB. So then when you drag it in, you're gonna basically do the same thing that you would do to the rest of the footage just to make sure that it's integrated. And I'll show you how to properly comp this stuff in a little bit later. Now I just create DPX sequences for working files because otherwise the R3Ds or whatever native camera file you're working with tends to be pretty heavy. But I do actually have the R3Ds here as well, just so you could see. When you go into DaVinci, and you'll see here, this is my red footage that I've brought in here. This is gonna be in the IPP2 red wide gamut RGB log 3G10 color space. So the DPX file that we've created is coming from this exact color space, so it's a log version of those settings. Okay, so the footage is imported into After Effects, it's interpreted correctly, but as we can see that it's very washed out. The first thing that you're gonna wanna do is to add some contrast to this. Now you could convert the footage using a color profile converter, but depending on the camera format, if it's Red, Arri, Sony, Blackmagic, they all have different conversion types. So in order to just cut through all the confusion and make it as simple as possible, we're gonna use a simple levels that will work with literally any log footage. So just go up to the effects and let's just find a levels and add it to the footage. But just based off the histogram, you're basically bringing the white points right to the clipping point, and you're also gonna bring the black points right to the clipping point. Just something like that. And it doesn't matter too much because you'll see what we're gonna do later on is gonna basically reverse this. And then you're going to want to shift the gamma. Probably somewhere in there is good. But we could take a screen grab of the original footage and kind of toggle between the two and see the difference. And also, like, if you want to match this even a little bit more, if you add saturation, just to be able to see a little bit closer, yeah, you can see it looks a lot brighter. So the sky is pretty blown out and clipped. But you can see now, this is kind of before and after. This is what the camera gave us, and this is what we're matching to. So you don't need the hue and saturation, take that off, and you basically just want this for the level's sake. This temporarily converts the footage into a normal contrast space so that you can composite your 3D rendered elements and your visual effects normally. Now that the image looks normal, you want to add this levels adjustment to every instance of the footage that's in your comp. Once your footage is converted, you can just composite the way that you normally would. And basically all you're trying to do at this point is just match it to the contrasted footage the best that you can, integrating if you have 3D renders or different visual effects assets, making sure that it just feels like it's a part of the scene. You don't need to worry about color or look or any of that kind of stuff because that's all going to get applied later on in the grade. So just make sure that it matches the plate. That's your number one concern. And again, say we wanted to do something like a sky replacement. Well, if we go to the Storyblocks library and we go to snapshots, we can search for sunset clouds and just find an image here that we think might work. Maybe something like this one here. It's got some subtle clouds in the sky. Let's download this and then let's drag that into After Effects. And you don't have to do this for every single image asset, but if you just set this to sRGB again, it's not really necessary, especially for images and things that already have a color applied to it. But you can see now if we want to comp this in, we're basically just trying to match what the shot looks like, what the plate looks like. And then what always helps with working with this kind of stuff to composite it is to add some kind of look to it, get it closer to what the footage looks like out of camera, and then try to match this image just so that it feels somewhat closer into the plate. And whenever I do sky replacement, I always set this to multiply. And I know that the sun direction was coming from frame left, so I'm gonna flip this horizontally and get it sitting into the plate, something like that. Just quickly draw a mask around this, feather it out, create a luma matte. So if we set this sky layer to the new luma matte, change it to luma matte, and then dial it in. Again, it doesn't have to be so harsh. You don't want to see a matte line along the trees. And also I like to go pretty subtle with my sky replacements. So I dialed it in here, what I'd want it to look like, and it gets me somewhere about that. And that looks pretty good, just to add a little bit of detail in the sky, because before we had just complete white. Now we got a little bit of sky, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off and keep it without the clouds for now. And if you're working with 3D renders, you don't need to worry about special color pipelines when you're rendering. Just render them as 32-bit linear EXRs, which will give you the most flexibility when you're compositing. So as you can see here, this is like adding in our shadows, adding in the vehicles, adding in a little bit of this ridge back in, adding some more grass and some of the sign that came out from compositing the cars on top. But now you can see the cars are composited into the scene. And from there was just a little bit of depth of field, a little bit of noise, and then I think I actually just took a little bit of saturation out of it just to match the plate a little bit more. And this was looking pretty realistic to the scene, like these vehicles look like they were actually in the scene, which is all that you need at this point. And if you need to judge it a little bit more with color, like we saw in the beginning, this is already pretty close to what the plate looks like coming out of the camera. But if you want to like add a little bit more of a color, you can add like a LUT in here, or you can add a color adjustment on top of everything just to see what it looks like and then turn it off at the end. So here I added a little bit more color into the shot, a little bit more saturation just to see what that was looking like. And again, here is like our original plate, so you could see it looks like it's integrated pretty well into the scene. And this next step is the key one. How do we get it to look like the original log footage that we had in the beginning? So here's what you're gonna do. You've composited the whole shot and now you need to reverse it so that it looks like it was in the log color space that it was in the very beginning. So what you're going to want to do is add an adjustment layer on top of the whole comp, and this is going to reverse the gamma. What this does is it mathematically reverses the original footage along with the whole comp back into its original log state. So if you go to your original footage and grab the levels adjustments that we made earlier, copy that, paste it onto a new adjustment layer at the top of the whole comp. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is take your input black, copy that, and paste it into your output black. Then zero out the input black. Then take your input white and copy and paste that into your output white and turn your input white back to 1. So that zeroes out and resets your input black and your input white and offsets it into the output black and output white. Now what you're going to want to do is copy what your gamma setting was and divide that into 1. So it would be 1 / or divided by what your gamma setting was and hit enter. So that reverses the gamma and it reverses the input black and the input white. Now you can see here below that your footage looks exactly like it did before. So if you go back to your original footage and you turn off the level settings that we added and you look at what your original plate looked like, if you take a screenshot of this and you turn all your effects back on, turn your levels back on, and look at your reverse gamma, if you A and B it, you can see that it looks exactly the same as your original plate. And now your visual effects are in log space. And any of the color settings that you had on top of it before, just turn those off. And you're going to want to export a DPX sequence of your finished shot. And now you can see the real trick of this is that we mathematically reversed the footage along with the whole comp back into its original log space. And if we bring this now into DaVinci Resolve, you can see we have the log footage here. And next to it, we have a plate where we have given it a color grade that we really like. So if we had two different shots, one that was a visual effects shot and one that came straight out of camera, and we like the color grade that we're applying to the regular footage, we could copy that color grade to the visual effects shot and it'll match all the rest of the footage around it exactly the same. And one more thing is that we can bring in the file of the version of the comp where we did sky replacement using a Storyblocks asset for the sky. And if we go into the color settings, we can take a look at what that'll look like. In this version, we already did a couple things to the sky. So if we turn those off, copy these settings and apply them to this shot, now you can see we have the shot looking exactly the same as our other shots, but now we have a nice sky element that we got from the Storyblocks website, and it's looking pretty nice. So because the visual effects were exported in log space, they get color graded exactly the same way as the original footage, and it really just helps everything integrate better. So this workflow lets you composite comfortably inside of After Effects while still maintaining a proper log color workflow. So don't be afraid to work in a 32-bit linear color space inside of After Effects, because with this technique, you can composite your visual effects properly without breaking your color pipeline.